sort of the highest end of deployment. Now, not everybody needs all of this. Certainly nobody starts with this full of a deployment. You start with, and what we're going to talk about today is these 2 bits right here, and then you work your way up from there to the point that you need. And the point that I'm really trying to get to again is that this adaptive automation is usable in all 3 ways, this automation that we build. Okay. So there's some more slides about this whole PDAS thing and the marketing type stuff. So this is actually pretty good data. I'm not going to read through it with you because I don't want to kill you guys with boredom, but the slide deck is available to download from not only the NetBrain University class lab, but the NetBrain University system itself. And we'll talk about where that stuff and where the workbooks will be later. But I just want to let you know that this slide deck is meant in part as written reference material, not just something to aid me yakking at you. Okay. Now, we touched on this a bit, but I do want to emphasize that the nice thing about adaptive automation is that it doesn't require any specialist knowledge to create the automation, or at least nothing specialist relating to NetBrain. You need to know what you're doing, of course, but it's the same, it's just like you would be doing if you wanted to do this manually. You need to know what to do and in what order. But then anybody, be it ops engineers, architects, security engineers, anybody can take these processes that they have and they can turn them into automation for everybody to use. And then everybody in the organization can take advantage of this knowledge, because while you may need a great deal of education about a particular topic and a great deal of expertise in that topic in order to perform the workflow manually, to just hit the button and then see what NetBrain spits up based on the instructions it was given by the expert, that's something that can be done by a NOC engineer, and often is. So to use the C-suite type language, we can shift workflow to the left, and we can also democratize our network knowledge throughout the entire organization. So, all right, now in terms of the NetBrain University class structure, we've identified 3 levels of mastery in terms of NetBrain. So what we're focusing on today is being what's called end users. Everyone starts as an end user. And this simply means being able to operate the platform on a day-to-day basis, to be able to build and use, there it is, to be able to build and use dynamic maps, to use the preventive automation dashboard, see the results of our preventive automation checks, to operate incidents and so forth. So that's what we're focusing on today. Now, everyone who has the brain cells, i.e., if you have an IQ above room temperature, you can learn how to use NetBrain very easily. And anyone who can learn how to be an end user can learn how to be a power user, which, as you see, there's many more individual components identified, but none of these are terribly complicated. These are how to build all the different elements of network design, or not that's that, network design, automation design. And so there are some really crazy, complicated, and fancy things that you can do. Many networks don't actually need this sort of thing, and even if you do, you don't need too many people who are able to do this. So people who are able to do the crazy stuff we call super users. So not everybody needs to be a super user. And frankly, not everybody can be. I mean, it's kind of over my head, to be perfectly honest. So the 100 series, which currently only consists of this class, is about being an end user. When you're ready, the 200 series of live classes is about being a power user, so very straightforward. The 300 series, which we currently don't have any live classes, that would be about being a super user. We do have the NetBrain immersion training, which is on-site training for 4 days at one of our global offices, and is focused on not only reviewing end user and power user stuff, but teaching people to be super users. And then the 400 series classes, which again, there's currently only one, is about administering NetBrain, which is its own thing. So if you're wondering what the different numbers for the classes mean, that's what that is. So any questions about any of that before we move on? All right. And just to remind anyone who wasn't with us at the very, very beginning of class, you can either write your questions in the chat on the Zoom bridge, which I have up on my side monitor, or you do have the ability to unmute yourselves, and please don't be shy about doing so. All right, it's about the bottom of the hour, so I'm assuming that everybody who's coming is already here, so I'm going to take a screenshot of who else here for later, because I will be marking attendance after class for administrative purposes. All right. Now, this class in terms of this class basically divides into 3 sections. The first section we've just finished, which is the intro yakking. And the second section is about how to do SMIP, as we're going to talk about in a second, which is the basics that apply pretty much whatever you're doing with NetBrain. And then the third section, we're going to take an overview of some of the types of stuff that we might be able to utilize inside the NetBrain platform, depending on what's been built. So, SMIP, or SMIP if you prefer. That stands for Search, Map, Incident, and Portal. This describes the basic workflow that we all go through when we are getting ready to use NetBrain for whatever. So, in fact, it's so fundamental that it can be described quite neatly on a single screenshot, as we see here. And this is just showing one of the search options, albeit a very commonly used one. But search can mean a couple different things, as we'll discuss. So, so just to confirm, yes, so point 1, NetBrain is, last I heard, it is certified to work with Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, and Apple Safari. So in practice, anything with a Chromium base seems to work fine from what I'm told, but I personally just use base Chrome on my work computer for simplicity's sake and to be purist. Anything else, your mileage may vary. The biggest thing that seems to crop up is GUI glitches, specifically with drop-down menus. So it's not like you're going to break the platform or anything. You can't. I mean, it's an external server, but you know, if there's a different browser you prefer, basically try it and see what happens, is my advice. You can't hurt anything long term. Number 2, NetBrain works at layer 2 and layer 3 of the OSI model. Technically, we do touch layer 4 in one very specific aspect of one very specific tool, namely the path calculator, but broadly speaking, layer 4 and higher is not what NetBrain deals with. Okay? And we can go into much more detail about that after class if you're interested in tech talk. But for now, I'm going to try and keep it relatively high level in terms of the administrative and technical stuff. Okay. You're welcome. All right. So searching. Searching means either creating a dynamic map for the specific situation or finding an existing dynamic map that already exists that suits the current situation. So what we're looking at here is, this slide is primarily looking at the visual search engine. The visual search is a string-based search engine that is built into NetBrain, and it's going to string search through the entire database that NetBrain has of device data, as well as associated files like configs and so forth. So in practice, it kind of works out to being Google search for our network. You can search for anything: host names, IP addresses, MAC addresses, phrases and config files, whatever. Search it and you will find whatever strings pop back. Now, we're not going to get into it, but there's a whole bunch of different wildcards and stuff you can use in basic visual search. But the big thing I do want to point out to you is that spaces are by default treated as OR operators with the basic visual search bar. So if you want to search for, say, a phrase in a config file that contains spaces, you're going to want to put double quotes around it so that you only get back hits on the entire phrase rather than, you know, X or Y or Z. There is an advanced search function where we can define up to 26 criteria and how they relate with a Boolean expression, and therefore do a much more precise search. This advanced search type logic is actually used a lot of different places around the NetBrain platform. It's pretty straightforward. The other thing that we're not going to talk about yet, but we'll get into later in class, is The other main way to create a dynamic map from scratch, besides search and extend, as I'm going to teach you at first, the other main way is with what's called the A to B path calculator tool that I mentioned a minute ago. So we will touch that, and that is also a very common way to make a map on demand. Building a dynamic map for a specific scenario is actually pretty normal, because remember, NetBrain has its overall picture of the network, and this only updates when a backend snapshot of the network is taken, which is usually set for every 24 hours, but it's up to your NetBrain administrator. So making however many dynamic maps is just fine. There are also site maps. So most people will use NetBrain to divide their network up into geographical locations, sites, and each of these categories has its own map automatically built. And of course, we can also save maps not just privately, but shared with our entire organization. And so it's very common to have maps of whatever utility that we return to over and over again that are stored publicly. There is also a search bar, as we see in the lower left, for incidents, and we'll talk more about incidents in a minute. So that's search. And then for the map itself, dynamic map, remember, is our user interface into the network. And it's what part of the network are we interested in right now? No more, no less. Because remember, NetBrain has this overall picture of the network. So in terms of the specific map, we want to eliminate the what we, at least in the West, call the Goldilocks paradox, which is, we don't want it too big, we don't want it too little, we want it just right. And because we can make as many of these as we want, that's just basically standard operating procedure, is to make a map that is perfectly suited to this particular use case, whatever it is. And then within the map, the way that we execute automation is what's called a runbook. So we'll get more into that in the second half of the class, but I do want to acquaint you with what a runbook looks like. It's a series of steps, basically, and when you boil down to it, a runbook is a procedure that is embedded in the map. And like I said, we'll get much more into that later. And then this isn't mandatory, but it's almost always something we're going to do. We're going to create an incident. An incident it's basically an IM feed. When you get down to it, is what the heart of an incident is. It is a way of communicating among multiple people, either at the same time or over time, or even just creating an executive summary of what happened for our own reference if we're working alone. So a map is, each incident needs at least one map that is linked to it, but we can have as many different maps linked into an incident as you like. And then the user or users can communicate with each other. And the idea being that the runbook is how we gather the data, and the data is then stored within the runbook. But not everything we gather is going to wind up being particularly relevant. So the idea is we only shout out the relevant stuff, and we do so right into the incident and make it available to everybody. So it's collaboration, coordination, escalation, all that good stuff. And again, specifically designed for collaboration. Now I did, when I liken the incident's primary message thing to an IM thread, I do so advisedly. We actually have a two-way chatbot capability where you can tie it together with a Microsoft Teams thread and have them replicate back and forth. So that's pretty sick. Now, one thing I should mention about dynamic maps is with the maps that we use frequently, oftentimes whoever made the map is not going to want us to go ahead and just mess around with the layout of the map to suit a particular use case. So what we can do is we can actually create within the map, we can create a sub copy of the map that belongs to us, even if the map as a whole doesn't, and then we can manipulate that. So that's called a personal map. It's a relatively new feature.